Hello everyone! Thank you for visiting our channel. Have you ever experienced such like stories? James had an elder brother named Daniel. When Haley and James decided to get married, Daniel suggested that they have a double wedding with him and his fiancée. Since Haley had no particular plans for the occasion, the idea seemed excellent to her. However, the wedding never happened. Daniel's fiancée left him, accusing him of infidelity. Haley was in shock. She could not believe that such a righteous man as Daniel turned out to be a traitor. The woman condemned him so strongly that she even refused to communicate with him for a while. James considered his wife's behavior a good sign. If she condemns a cheater, it means she would never do such a thing herself. It gave him some confidence in their already strong relationship. Now, 5 years after the incident, Haley has relaxed. She stopped avoiding communication with her husband's brother, and at their meetings, she did not express her negative opinion of him anymore. James was glad that two important people in his life had found a common language again. Haley worked on Saturdays until noon. Once, coming home, she caught her husband cleaning up. "Dear, I was cleaning up and found a single sock under the couch. But there is no second one in my drawer either," said her husband. "Maybe I already threw the second one away," replied Haley. Haley looked at him reproachfully. The couple laughed, and the sock went into the trash. The woman was glad that her husband did not remember that he never had such socks in his life, and promised to be more careful in the future. James had a tough month at work. He was twice delayed on a business trip, and he had to spend 3 whole weeks in a strange city instead of one. In the evenings, he and Haley had a traditional call during which they told each other about the events of the day. His wife shared interesting stories from work, what kind of clients come to their store, and how sometimes they all laugh at them together in the utility room. These stories were a relief for James, and he wanted to come home as soon as possible. One Friday evening, when James returned, the couple invited Daniel to visit them. They drank 2 bottles of wine, laughed a lot, and James enjoyed being at home surrounded by loved ones. It warmed his soul. Tired of the men arguing about politics, Haley went out to the balcony to smoke, and a couple of minutes later, Daniel joined her. "I saw you in the center yesterday," he said. "Why didn't you come over?" She smiled. "So you weren't alone?" The man replied with a mocking tone. The smile disappeared from Haley's face. She looked at Daniel fearfully, her hands trembling. "What, Haley, the killer who cries louder than anyone at a funeral? Is that why you hated me so much for betraying Samantha, to deflect suspicion from yourself?" Daniel said insolently with a smirk. The woman begged him not to tell her husband anything. She really didn't want him to find out about the affair and didn't want to ruin their marriage. She tried to convince her brother-in-law that it wouldn't happen again, that she wouldn't cheat on her husband in the future. He nodded, smoked, and listened. Suddenly, he said that she had convinced him, and he wouldn't say anything. But there were special conditions. "I've liked you for a long time. Will you sleep with me too?" he said. Haley was shocked, but she didn't see any other way out. She had to agree to Daniel's conditions. She really stopped communicating with her lover. Her brother-in-law didn't say when Haley would have to pay for the daycare, and she lived in anticipation every day. She didn't know that an interesting plan had long been brewing in Daniel's head. James had been missing from his office for the last 2 weeks. They were working on an important project, and he needed to make corrections. So practically all the employees temporarily changed their place of residence from home to work offices. Some of the wives and husbands weren't too happy about this arrangement. James' wife didn't start any scandals with him. She understood that he was working for the good of the family. And in general, Haley was not a scandalous woman. On Wednesday, Haley had a day off. Around noon, Daniel called her and reminded her of their agreement, saying that he would come to her later. In order to muster some courage, the woman decided to have a drink before meeting with Daniel. She kept wondering whether she was doing the right thing. Perhaps she should tell James everything herself, like ripping off a band-aid, quick but rather painful. Daniel still hadn't arrived, and the bottle of wine was almost empty. Finally, when the clock hand was approaching 5 in the evening, someone rang the doorbell. Standing at the doorstep was a brazenly grinning Daniel. "I see you're ready," he laughed, looking at the tipsy Haley. She glared at him angrily and let him into the apartment. It turned out that the man had brought more wine, and Haley didn't refuse a new glass. When Daniel started his actions, the woman was already quite drunk, and her brother-in-law began to seem sympathetic and quite pleasant to her. James left work at almost the right time. The project was in the home stretch, and only those employees who were directly involved in its delivery remained in the office. He drove home happily, anticipating a warm family evening. But an unpleasant surprise awaited him at home. The windows of their damp apartment were lit. James chuckled to himself. He had always joked with his wife that she was afraid to be alone, so she turned on the lights everywhere she could. It was with this phrase that he entered the house. The words stuck in his throat. The most disgusting scene imaginable lay before him. Sitting in his chair where James liked to relax after work was his brother Daniel, and standing naked on his lap in front of him was Haley. "Hey, James," his brother smiled. At that phrase, James' eyes darkened with anger. He lunged at his brother, pushing away his wife, and hit Daniel. A fight broke out between them. Haley tried to separate them, and almost succeeded, but her husband pushed her away again. "I saved you," Daniel shouted. "Why?" James shouted back. "Because your wife is a cheater. She slept with another guy, you know, and she judged me." James sat on the floor, leaning against the couch. He listened to Daniel's disjointed speech and all the while looked at Haley, who was sitting across from him against the wall, covering her body with her hands. "Is this true?" he asked his wife. She nodded. James dropped his head onto his hand. The three of them sat in silence, breathing heavily. Finally, James broke the silence by asking his brother why Daniel couldn't just tell him about his wife's infidelity, why he had to sleep with her himself. The answer seemed absurd to him. Daniel said he wanted to show James the truth for himself, because if he had just told him that he saw his wife with someone else, James wouldn't have believed him and would have written it off as a long-standing grudge Daniel had against Haley. Swearing loudly, James pushed his brother out the door, threatening that if he saw him again, he wouldn't be responsible for his actions. When James returned to the living room, Haley was already dressed. Her eyes were swollen from tears. He explained that he wouldn't be able to forgive his wife for her infidelity, especially not with his own brother. He wondered why Haley had agreed to this deal with Daniel, who she was trying to protect. She agreed to leave his apartment as soon as she found suitable housing, and that's what they decided. For 2 months, Haley couldn't move out of James's apartment. He began to think that she was intentionally dragging her feet to cool him off and forgive her. But he was determined not to forgive her, so he took matters into his own hands and found her a new apartment himself, paying the first month's rent. He didn't even regret the money. His peace of mind was worth more. As soon as Haley moved out, James breathed a sigh of relief. He had already come to terms with his future bachelor life. However, even after several years, Haley had not found a worthy husband. She tried to start relationships with several men, but they broke up as soon as it came to moving in together. She only managed to get married to one man, but a month before the wedding, he ran away with a young girl to warm lands, leaving Haley only a message in social networks with apologies. Haley was left alone again, and now infidelity has become her worst nightmare. What do you think about this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. And thank you for listening to the story until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and be sure to like this video, as it will help us promote the channel. All the best.